Sorry for the delay. A little bit of technical difficulties, everything USB, HDMI, and all those alphabet soup. Nothing ever matches. So, but we're here today to talk about technology that did work, right? So, my name is Scott Brownlee. I'm the executive director of the Thunder Bay Museum. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to tonight's lecture. But first, I would like to begin tonight by acknowledging the original custodians of this land, pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and future. They hold the memories, the traditions, the culture, the hopes of Indigenous peoples. I would also like to recognize that we are meeting on the traditional lands of Bawlf First Nation, signatories to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850, and to acknowledge the role of the Métis settlement in the development of our community. And now I'd like to pass the microphone over to the chair of the Programs and Plaques Committee for the Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society, Mr. Nick Nicholas.
Thank you, Scott. I find that the longer we operate in the pandemic, the worse we get with technology. I don't know if anyone else knows that, but it seems to get more difficult every day. So as Scott said, my name is Nick Duplessis. I chair the Plaques and Programs Committee. We do a lot of great work, but we're specifically proud of being able to host a lecture on the fourth Tuesday of every month as part of the museum to continue our commitment to public education and public learning. I'd like to start by thanking the Lakehead University History Department, who is our sponsor for tonight's event and for the entire lecture series. This event could not be held without their support. Next, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Bill Reist. Bill is a retired structural engineer. He graduated from McMaster University in 1963 and came to Port Arthur in the fall of 1964 to work at the Howe Engineering. Howe Engineering, it's a familiar name. His experience with Howe included a great deal of design and construction work with grain elevators, which were the core expertise of the company. Bill specifically was directly responsible for concept development, detailed engineering design, and construction of an inland terminal grain elevator in Indiana, a waterfront terminal elevator in Windsor, and many maintenance and remedial projects at the Lakehead elevators. Bill also supervised the construction of the dock and breakwater in El Salvador, which consisted of a series of slip-formed concrete caissons and included ship handling features for berthing and mooring, as well as providing protection for the port from strong ocean swells. In 2000, Bill took his experience in construction to the mining field during the expansion of Lakehead mines. Today, Bill serves on the board of directors for the Friends of the Grain Elevator. He will be presenting on the fascinating construction of the twin Bawlf and Stewart grain elevators and their simultaneous construction in the summer of 1923. So I'm happy to introduce our speaker and welcome our speaker to the stage, Bill.
That was a quick biography. I don't have to do it. Good evening, everyone. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the construction of the original parts of the two elevators that are in the middle of that photograph, which is the elevator that now operates as Cannon Morgan, and the one beside it on the right was Bawlf and is now by Terra B, part of the old Pool 7 A and B complex. So to begin, here we go. I'll give you a little vocabulary for people that aren't familiar with the elevator. We have the workhouse, the storage annex, and on top of that is a cupola, which is basically the shelter where the conveyor belts are operating inside of. There's a dock where the ships come. The water area is called a slip. The harbor's out on the top. And then when we look at the elevator on the other side, we see the traction and the rail trestle. Basically that's what those two elevators originally looked like. So we're going to see the construction of those right from the ground up pretty well. So what happens when they start out to build a grain elevator like this, they're built out from the lakeshore because they have to get out far enough into the water that a ship that they can dredge the slip deep enough that ships can come in and be lowered. So the first construction that goes ahead is all the, is the rail trestles, which you see stretching out here. And you see a number of pile drivers operating in the area as they're building the trestles. And they're also driving piling to support the structures and sheet piling around the site that will be backfilled so that there's a space to build the new elevators on. This all happens basically the year or the winter before. They work off the ice to drive some of the piling and so on. So it's all happening here. When we come to this is May now, May 22nd. And the piling has been driven. The piling that we see here is for the storage attics. And it's driven and the piles are all driven basically to bedrock, which is quite shallow in that inner city area, about 30 feet. These piles are all driven down to refusal, and then they're cut off just above your low lake level. The idea being that they will be poured, a concrete mattress will be poured on top of them, and that will protect these piles, these wooden piles, from any air getting at them, between the water level and the concrete, so they don't rot. So we're at a point now that you can see the trestle behind, and on that trestle is a work shed that's been built where they do all the preparation, fabrication, and carpentry for the forms and so on that will go into building the elevator. It also provides an area where they can bring rail cars in with all their supplies and materials. You have to remember that in those days, basically the city ran on coal and steam. You can see the coal dock trains in behind, way behind there, where they were unloading ships bringing coal in. And then this tower that's been built here is a skip tower. So a skip is like a hopper full of concrete, and they're elevated up and then discharged to wherever they're pouring concrete. You can also see the small picture down below. We can see preparation of the site enclosure, which is a sheet piling that goes all around the site that will be filled with backfill. Mixed up stuff. And here we're getting ready to pour the mattress over on the left of Bawlf site. And you can see that what they've done is they've erected a chute that's going to come out to distribute that to get the concrete down to a point where it's convenient to move it around and pour that whole mattress. We didn't have big long cranes and things that did this. So this is the way that they was very customary to build the elevators. On the Stewart side, we've got forms going up for the mattress as well. We'll go to the next one. So here's in the workhouse, we're going to grow this elevator from bottom to top. So there's the basement, first floor, the workhouse bins. You can see some shiploading spouts on the wall there. The bin floor, distributing floor, steel girders, and top floor. So when the grain comes in from the rail cars, it goes into the basement, is elevated, that's where they call them elevators, all the way to the top. It's down is weighed, and then the distributing floor can direct the grain to various bins in the workhouse or the conveyor belts that go out to the annex for storage. So that gives you a picture of what we're going to build. Here you can see the basement walls are being started to form, and you can see how the skip tower, that chute has been reconfigured so that it's aimed at the workhouse. So then we'll be pouring concrete for the workhouse, and the one in the lower, the other picture is very similar. And you can see the workhouse of the old Thunder Bay elevator, the wooden workhouse in the background here on the right. Okay. Here we are, again, we're building basement forms for the Stewart elevator. There's some of the forming and so on in the foreground for the dock. Okay. You can see how all those forms are pre-made. that will be used to construct the walls and so on. And that's why you've got this big shed, the carpentry shed, to make all these components. Now we're in the middle of June, and the basement walls are poured. The workhouse, first floor, you can see in the background on both of them. It's amazing how these two sites went together. The two elevators are identical in their design. It's just that they're built mirror images of each other on either side of the slip. So it's almost like it's erased because they go up together, the two of them. And you're employing about 200 men on each of those sites, at least. Okay, next one. Here we can see a bunch of forms that are being prepared for the silos, particularly in the storage annex, and also in the workhouse. So you have a circular form that's going to form a slip form, and it's about 4 feet high, and they all go together to make the pattern of the walls. So concrete goes in the top, and they move up continuously, and so that the concrete is basically enclosed in there as long as it takes for the slip form to rise 4 feet. By the time it comes out the bottom, it's got to set strong enough that it's going to continue to support the ongoing work. You can also see how shallow the whole slip area is. You can see where the lakeshore is back in the background, and you can see a horse and cart there in the water. And you can see how busy that trestle is now with all the material and supplies and so on. Next. So here we're getting the basement walls poured. Again, you've got that chute on the left there coming over to where it can access all those walls and get them work. And they're also probably, by the way that chute on the right hand picture, they're probably pouring a foundation for the traction. There's a close-up of the chute coming up. So you can see up at the top is the hopper. So there's a skip that goes up and discharges into that hopper. The concrete then slides down. And then down here, you've got men at a hopper on the floor that they're working on with buggies that will distribute the concrete all around. These are a wheel buggy, which is, you're not like a wheelbarrow where you're holding up to load up. These are on wheels, so they're much easier to work with. But you can see the men at various points, just controlling the flow of the concrete. Workhouse now is the first floor walls are poured, and the bottom of the workhouse bins are formed and they're being poured. You can see the spout in each picture going over there to where the concrete is being delivered. Meanwhile, on the basement, you've got the bin floor, or the bin bottom slab has been poured, and they're beginning to put the slip form components together on the two annexes. Here's another close-up. Here we're seeing the slip form itself, and there's a hopper on the slip form, and that's where all the concrete is picked up from there and then distributed around and poured into each of the walls of in this case, it's the workhouse. And we have to make sure that slip is all going up at the same time. You don't start to tilt, it's not a problem. And there's jacks all around each of their bins, and each one of those jacks has a man that's operating it. So it's a very busy platform. Where are we at now? Date West. We're into July. Yeah. And you can, again, We're slipping both workhouses are being slipped. One's a little ahead of the other, not by much. And you can see how the chute from the skip tower is being raised up just to follow that slip form as it's going up. And here's a picture as we're getting to the top of the workhouse bins. And you can see the bottom, down on the bottom left, is the slip form set up for the bins in the attics. The three openings in the walls there are for the shipping spouts. And you can see behind there's a foundry and so on. There's no ore docks or anything in there yet. More of a close-up of just to show you how congested and how many people are on the deck. Here's one of the guys operating the jack. His hard hats were different in those days. And smoking was on 12 until the other riders started operating. And the other thing with the slip form is you see that platform hanging underneath. That's a finishing platform. Never work off there to correct any problems, any faults with the concrete as it comes out the bottom of the forms. Okay. So now we're up at it looks like they're pouring the bin floor slab at the top of the workhouse as it is now. And the forms and the jack yokes and everything are all in place to start slipping the attics silos. Okay. This is a picture that fascinated me to show you how they coordinated everything. The ships were dredging material, stone and sand for the concrete, you see, and would discharge it at the hopper right in the foreground. And there was a conveyor then, and it would discharge material and then transfer over and do the same thing on the second elevator. And then there's a conveyor that comes up sideways, and that is going to the batch plant where they're making the concrete. You see the forms in the foreground of the Stewart elevator, which is for the traction walls. You can go back one. And you can see pool 6 in the background. A little misty. Okay. So we're starting to slip form the walls of the silos. We're also forming the structure for the bin floor of the workhouse. In both of the workhouse. We can see the front of the elevator in the background, and behind it is the cave. Here the slipping is continuing. Now that smoke coming out of there is from the warehouse that's up. It's powering everything for the concrete plant and the skip tower and so on. And the workhouse has got the forms up for the distributing floor, which is basically where there's a movable spout that will go around and it can contact all different holes in the floor to feed onto the bin floor belts or down into the bins in the workhouse. And then now in the lower, on both pictures, you can see that the dock, that all the forms and so on have been stripped off the dock. Okay. Now we're up as far as the walls are being formed for the scale floor. The slip form has progressed quite well. And we just keep on going. There we go. Just about the top there now. You can see how tall the bins are. The scale floor columns and the floor above it are being poured from the skip towers. You can see how closely they stay together as far as the construction. Okay, and here the walls are formed for the garners, which are the hoppers that hold the grain that come into the scales. The scales are batch scales, so they need a surge capacity on top of them to hold the grain as they weigh it out. So those are the walls. The top there are being poured in the garners. Also, the forms are now up for the cupolas in both cases, and some of the slip form components are being torn out. You can see in the foreground the conveyor structure that was carrying all our aggregates and so on have fallen into disuse. Soon to disappear. But again, the slip is still not dredged out, so that you're basically in very shallow water in there. Now we're up to the top floor and the roof of the workhouse. And the cupolas are being formed and ready to pour here. And here we see the walls of the cupola have been stripped on the Stewart elevator. And the other one looks like it probably is too. And that's September the 7th. Now that's the slip form itself took about two and a half weeks to strip the annex silos. This is some of them. These people are here tonight. This is basically a plaque, the historic plaque dedicating the elevator business in Thunder Bay. For the next one. There's the text to it. I won't read it. So that basically we're building an elevator. We didn't do all the furnishing inside, all the equipment and so on and so forth. And the interesting thing, these two elevators are concrete, completely, all the whole structure is concrete. There are some infill brick paneling in the upper floors, but other than that, they're all concrete. Any questions, any comments?
Very, very interesting. At what speed did the strips move up there?
The rate in which it would climb would depend on the weather, the temperature particularly, and how fast the concrete was setting. Yeah. So the strips that I've been on used to be up to 12 inches an hour. But these, I'm sure, were much slower than that just by the calendar dates that we see. I think they were quite a bit slower than that.
And we have to change Jackson. What's the lift of that? Or is it infinite? Is it continuing?
How's that?
Sorry, the Jackson.
Yeah.
Moving them up.
Yeah.
You have to.
It's like drill rod that swings together, and they just keep climbing up that rod. So those rods go or start out in the basement or start and go up with them, and they stay all the way. And so they augment the vertical reinforcing steel that's in the walls as well. Mm-hmm. And then there's the hoop steel that encloses them as well. So all of the concrete and all of the reinforcing steel has to be on that slip deck as it's going forward and distributed. And because of the yokes fit over top of the opening in that slip form, all that rebar has to be threaded underneath it. So it's a real coordination effort to do that.
Was it continuous 24-hour day pouring?
Usually, yes. Because if you stop the form, you've got a jacket free, clean it so that when you put fresh concrete in, it's going to slip. If you leave it in contact with the poured concrete, not going to break it loose and continue on. So yeah, they will, there's two kinds of forming like that. One is jump forming where they will pour and leave it 24 hours and come in and go up 1 acre and do it that way. But these, to me, they're very much like their slip forms.
Where was slip forming developed?
When was it developed?
Where was it invented?
Well, pool two, the first slip form Windsor was 1908. But they were slip forming earlier than that in the States.
Were there reinforcing rods in the silos or the pure cement?
Yeah, because if your basic forces in a silo are trying to burst out. So you've got circular steel, horizontal steel all the way up. And because the loads get greater as you go down, your spacing on that steel changes as you progress up. In other words, it gets wider apart as you get higher in the wall. You've also got vertical steel because part of the grain weight doesn't all just go straight to the bottom. It arches out and is carried by the walls.
Have they had problems with the concrete and steel separating? Did they have that problem with bridges where the action of the steel goes against the action of the concrete and eventually they start to deteriorate? Have they had any problems like that in silos?
There have been. Basically, the problem that you'll get is if you get enough water penetration into the wall, the steel will start to rust, and the rust expands and it will fall off concrete. So you'll see in some elevators, you'll see horizontal rusty lines. That's what's happening there. Very seldom we've been very fortunate. We haven't seen a lot of that here in Thunder Bay, but there have been cases where it's been really bad. And it depends on the integrity of the concrete and the thickness of the cover of concrete over top of that steel to protect it from being exposed to moisture.
When did those two elevators open for business?
Pardon me?
When did they open for business?
I'm sorry.
When did they open? When did they go to business? When did they go great?
Which elevators?
These
These two elevators would have been open in 1924.
My question is related to the cement. And we were impressed by the sand and gravel piles that you had. Where did that gravel come from?
What I've been told is a lot of the stone was dredged at Hare Island. And it was, I know when they were renewing the steel revetments and putting steel sheet piling in, because the timber sheet piling that was in originally was deteriorating, we drilled through to put the tie rods in to restrict their hold on top of it. And some of that was red stone, quite large.
Thank you. Because that means something.
Yeah.
So Hare Island stone will probably not be red. The Paradise Island and Howe Island had red stone. And that's the significant amount of the stone that built the elevators in the area was fashioned from that area.
Yeah.
And I know that area quite well. So that's why, and size and grading and variety of things like that. To your knowledge, was there much of that? I mean, this was washed brown stone, period.
Yeah, exactly what we saw. Like there's a lot of the finer stone that have been crushed,
Right.
but there was some in the dock particularly. There was cobble-sized rocks in there.
So the notion of Hare Island, and I know that's I know where it is, but my suspicion is that it's not red, and the only red large supply washed, and it would be typically. It would be bigger pea gravel. It could be whatever size, but generally round, etc. There was a large volume of it there. It was trundled in and taken down the back that way through the number 10 lighthouse and all the rest of that stuff. That's what it was lighthouse. But the sand. What color was the sand in that elevator? No idea. Okay.
I think it was, from what I see of the concrete, it was probably a light gray brown.
Sure. Makes sense. And would they have had a film on site to slate the line, or would it have been brought in bags, to your knowledge?
The cement would probably coming in bags.
Okay,
It might not have, I mean, the railroad was bringing it in, but probably in bags, I would guess.
sure enough, yeah, because, and with regards to the Stewart elevator, how many more other elevators had been built by the time they were there? Were they like number 20, 21?
Well, yeah, the first, pool 4A was built in 1917. In 1916, pool 9, the annex was formed. 1918 was 5, or 4B, Richardson, 1918. So yeah, they had the experience. You could see they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
By this time, yes.
Sure enough. And the bar that was it was square bar, I assume. It wasn't round bar. I'm only guessing. And size of the bar would have been inch by inch.
They've been probably like going. I mean, all the work I've done has all been round.
Yes.
But you would start out with a number 5 or number 6 at the bottom of the walls. By the time you got to the top, you want to go down 2 sizes so you can't confuse them when they're kicking around on the deck. And so if we go maybe you start with a 6 and you go down to 4 when you got up near the top.
Sure. Thanks.
Has there been any determination about how many people were killed during the construction of that elevator?
I have not heard any data about that at all. I don't like, and I mean, it doesn't look as safe as they are these days because you haven't got hard hats and all the things, but, I don't know. There wasn't, from anything we've read, I don't remember, like in the revert material, I don't know any construction accidents that were reported.
That's probably because of the war.
Reported.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Just a reminder for our viewers joining us on Zoom, if you wanted to ask a question, please do use the question and answer feature on Zoom, and we will make sure that your question gets included. So just a reminder, please use that question and answer function if you're joining us on Zoom to get that answered live. But back over to you guys for in-person questions.
Another question. What railway company is pushing into that elevator? Is that known? Which railway company? CPR, CNR?
Okay, well, CPR built the first elevators in the Lakehead. They built which is on the site of Pool 2, which is down by the marina. And then they built that elevator. It was built in 1884. It's very exposed there because the breakwater is not complete enough to shelter it. So the next elevators they built were on the river. So you had 4 built. CPR A, B, C, and D, and E, because D was what became Westland, further up the river. But it was much more sheltered there. There was a dredging program that was started to make sure that the river was deep enough for the ships. And they also built the turning basin up at the top by the river mill, so ships could find a place to turn around and come back up. But that was, those were through the 1890s. Those elevators were built.
We don't have any information on who is pushing into those 2 elevators.
Sorry.
Which railway company is asking were supplying the rail cars at that time?
To those two.
CP was a mover and shaker here. I mean, they had built the transcontinental rail line that was delivering grain to Port Arthur and Fort William. And therefore, they were the prime mover of that whole thing. There was all box cars, of course. Yeah,
I think one might add that the Canadian Northern built what became Pool 6. Canadian National.
Yeah.
The Grand Trunk Pacific.
Yeah.
And what is now the Cargill.
So those elevators
were the Canadian National.
Yeah. And they were built in the teens. They were built before these guys. We never. So you had so that's the thing, that all these elevators, so many of them were private companies that were handling the specific grain of their own. And that's why you had such a number of the elevators in the area.
I worked for CP Rail as a carman in the early 70s. And we had to push cars into the elevator to take out the empties. And then doing that on an evening when it was total darkness and there was a storm coming off the lake, you had the grain dust rolling into your face. It certainly wasn't a very good way to work at that point in time.
Yeah.
We worked a 3-man crew, but it wasn't pleasant.
Well, then because the first grain shipments came out of the west in '83, before that elevator was built, before the corn elevator was built. And that would have probably all been bagged. So then the transfer of that to a ship is a long, laborious process. And so that's why they built that first elevator. And then the experience with that one put them to build the other elevators over on the river. And they're a different animal from these guys, because these elevators here, you have a workhouse where basically your ship loading spouts are concentrated in one location and the ship moves back and forth under it. Whereas the ones on the river were long along the riverfront and had multiple spouts, so they could probably load the ship without it moving at all. But they were very subject to fires, a lot of burn down.
Does anybody have any last questions? We have time for maybe one or two more.
Bill, was that a Thunder Bay construction company or?
No, that was there they are right there.
Just curious where they're from.
Carter Walls Alligator.
What about the furnishings inside there? Now it took about half a year, more than half a year to finish off all the gallery trippers, the belts, the bits, things like that. And do you have any history or stories of those? As I understand it, you buy the meat components, and sometimes the fit was custom, almost no drawing. So in fact, the notion would be certain things would be drawn, shoots, etc., would be field fit, all field, of course, etc. And the elevating buckets, things like that. What kind of equipment would it have been? For example, Elstromers, it would have been, not Bueller Mag, but other companies. Any idea? Any comments on that?
No.
Okay.
But yes, you're right. I mean, it would have been all kinds of local companies, sheet metal companies, and the conveyor belts and all the things that.
And the electrical inside, was it at that point still a low voltage and explosion proof bulbs and all that?
Yeah, none of that was, I mean, that was just a twinkle in somebody's eye. Most of the explosion prevention measures that have grown over the years were, and I mean, things like dust control and so on. Again, when these were built, there was very little of that. We all know how dusty the elevators used to be.
Right. So we had power here, we had no steam plant requirement to generate power like they have on the river, although all the elevators in the river had the power. And no smokestack, no stacks.
And because every one of these elevators that you see pictures of, all the CPR elevators, every one of them's got one of those with a big stack. Yeah. Because they were all driven by steam. Line shafts and rope drives, most of them. There's now rope drives on Marine Lake in Port Colborne. And there's one old retired guy was the only guy who knew how to splice rope drive.
Well, there's still ropes on the elevator that's preserved too, if I'm not mistaken, on the river. There's rope leads and various things like that.
But they had, in that elevator in Port Colborne, there was a cat in the office, this big. And they needed him to keep the mice down from chewing on the rope drives.
That cat.
Yes.
Bill, is all this material yours? The sources you've got here, all those 3 firms?
Sure.
Is this material yours? Those
Yes.
photographs yours?
I got this material from the CD Howe archives. When the office closed down, they were going to junk everything. And so I've got sequences like this of the number of the, like pool 1, pool 4A, pool 4B, the 1927 version. And so I've got a number of sequences like this of how they can go.
So you say they're from the CD Howe archives. Is there an archive for the CD Howe company somewhere? Okay, somewhere?
It was the Port Arthur office, so there was all the, I mean, they never threw drawings up. There were design drawings that were for the post office in Port Arthur, the Eden's building, things like that were there. Hillcrest High School. I didn't get all that. Some of the material I brought to the museum. These photographs I couldn't let go until I had some of these PowerPoint things because they really work out well. And they're beautiful photographs. They're 8x10, black and white.
Yeah, great.
You know, the lovely did all of the photography. So.
But there's no established CD Howe archive.
No. No. In fact, I was very disappointed because the company that bought, I had no respect for any of that stuff. But the Montreal files in the Montreal office were all just burnt.
What about the linen drawings? Did you get any of the linen?
Oh, lots of linen drawings.
You got the linen?
I never had to use linen.
No, but do you have them? Do you have them from the CD Howe?
Yes, I don't have any linen drawings. I don't think. If I do, they're here in the museum.
Oh.
But there were lots of linen drawings.
That's the same thing that happened to the shipyards too, all their documents got destroyed. Most of them.
You need to have somebody come in and do a rescue operation on one of these places.
Were these added to, was
Yes.
there more?
Yes.
Yeah. We didn't know.
When we look back at go back to the first slide, the introductory slide there, stuff. There, you can see kind of all there's an inshore annex, which was the original one. And then there's a skinny one that comes on out. And there's another annex that was built on the lakeside. And then all of the malt plant is inside of that. And then on the Stewart side, there was an outshore annex built, and there was another inshore annex built as well. The outshore Stewart one was built in 65. And then the other big elevator that was built in the 60s was Pool 1. The second elevator that was on that site was built in 61, 62.
We have time for one more question. Does anybody have one last question to ask?
You've been a great audience. Thank you. Lots of questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill, for that awesome presentation. Obviously, grain elevators, the grain trade in general, very, very important to our history. It's something that everyone who resides in our community should know. The foundational role that they play is Fort William, Port Arthur, now Thunder Bay. So this concludes our formal program. Guests are welcome to stay here to socialize or to chat with Bill if they would like. All, of course, following current health protocols. There are refreshments at the back. And I also wanted to encourage everyone to visit the gift shop on the way out, which is on the first floor. Finally, I'd like to conclude with another thank you to Bill for the amazing presentation, the very informative presentation, and remind everyone that the fourth Tuesday of every month, say December, we do have these public lectures. So, like I said, it's open and free to the public, and you're always encouraged to come out. So, thank you again, and thank you, Bill, for the presentation.